Sometimes the cruelest thing family can do is leave you with nothing but questions and a piece of land nobody wants. That's exactly what happened to 68-year-old Dessa Langtree when she came down from the mountains after 40 years to bury her brother. His will left her $1 and a barren hillside. The whole town of Carrion Ridge laughed at the mountain woman, certain she'd been made a fool. But Dessa knew something they didn't. She set up camp on that worthless ground and started digging. What she found beneath the dirt stopped the laughter cold. Her brother hadn't left her nothing. He'd left her the one thing that could destroy everything Carrion Ridge had built. What was buried under that land? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bus dropped Dessa Langtree at the edge of Carrion Ridge just as the sun began its descent behind the Bitterroot Mountains. She stood there for a moment, a tall woman with silver hair braided down her back, wearing worn leather boots and a canvas jacket that had seen more seasons than most people see in a lifetime. Her hands, calloused and strong, gripped a single weathered pack. 40 years. That's how long it had been since she'd walked these streets. The town hadn't changed much, at least not on the surface. Main Street still stretched 5 blocks, lined with brick buildings that wore their age like badges of honor. The hardware store stood where it always had, next to the post office with its faded American flag. The diner, Lucy's Place, though Lucy had been dead for 20 years, still had the same cracked neon sign. But Dessa could feel the difference in the air, something harder and more cautious than the town she'd left behind. She walked slowly, deliberately, her boots making soft sounds on the sidewalk. People stared. A woman sweeping the front of the general store paused mid-stroke. 2 men sitting outside the barber shop stopped their conversation. A young mother pulled her child closer as Dessa passed. The mountain woman had come back, and nobody quite knew what to make of it. Dessa had left Carrion Ridge when she was 28 years old, pregnant and unmarried, running from shame and whispers, and a town that had already decided her story before she could write it herself. She'd lost that baby in the high country, buried it beneath a white pine tree, and never spoke of it again. The mountains had become her home, her sanctuary, her prison. She'd built a life of solitude, guiding hunters in the fall, trapping in the winter, living by the rhythm of seasons rather than the judgment of people. Her brother Cole had been the only thread connecting her to this place. He'd written letters, not often but enough, short practical notes about the weather, the ranch, his health. He never asked her to come back, never reproached her for leaving. That was Cole's way. He understood that some people needed distance to survive. The lawyer's office was at the end of Main Street, above the old mercantile. Dessa climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The door read, "Mitchell & Sons, Attorneys at Law," in gold letters that had faded to a dull brass color. She knocked once and entered. Raymond Mitchell looked up from his desk, and for a moment surprise flickered across his face before he composed himself into professional courtesy. He was younger than Dessa expected, probably mid-40s, with the soft hands of a man who'd never split firewood or skinned an elk. "Miss Langtree," he said, standing and extending his hand. "Thank you for coming in. Please have a seat." Dessa shook his hand. His grip was weak and settled into the chair across from his desk. The office smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Framed certificates lined the walls, along with photographs of Mitchell with various local dignitaries. She recognized the mayor, a man named Hollis, standing beside Mitchell at what looked like a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Mitchell said, opening a folder on his desk. "Your brother was a respected member of this community." Dessa said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence often revealed more than questions. Mitchell cleared his throat. "Cole's estate is relatively straightforward. The ranch was sold 3 years ago to cover medical expenses. His savings were modest." He paused, glancing at her as if expecting a reaction. "He left specific instructions regarding his remaining assets." "Which are?" Dessa's voice was rough from disuse. She didn't talk much in the mountains. Mitchell slid a document across the desk. $1 in cash and a parcel of land, approximately 40 acres on the northern ridge above town. The property is undeveloped and, I'll be frank, of minimal value. The soil is poor, no water access, no road. Cole purchased it 15 years ago for unpaid taxes. Dessa took the document and read it carefully. The legal description matched land she remembered from her childhood, a barren hillside that her father used to stare at from their porch, though she'd never understood why. The same land her great-grandfather Josiah had supposedly claimed back in the 1880s, before the official founding of Carrion Ridge. "There's also this," Mitchell said, sliding an envelope across the desk. Inside was a $1 bill, crisp and new, and beneath it a handwritten note in Cole's familiar scrawl. "It's yours now. Do what you couldn't do then." Dessa read the note 3 times, her jaw tightening. Cole had always been cryptic, even in his letters. But this felt different. This felt like an assignment. "I don't suppose Cole explained his reasoning?" she asked. Mitchell shook his head. "He came in 6 months ago, revised his will, and left those exact instructions. I advised him that the land could be sold, that you might prefer cash, but he was insistent." He paused. "If you'd like, I can arrange a sale. There's been some interest in properties on that ridge." "Interest from who?" "Vincent Hollis. He's been developing properties around town, bringing in some economic growth. He's expressed willingness to purchase various parcels for future expansion." Vincent Hollis. The name tugged at something in Dessa's memory. A boy, 2 grades ahead of her in school, son of the mayor back then. Someone who always seemed to be at the center of things. Now apparently following in his father's footsteps. "I'll hold on to it," Dessa said, folding the document and note into her jacket pocket. "For now." Mitchell looked relieved, as if he'd expected an argument. "Of course. The deed is already in your name. If you need anything else, please don't hesitate to call." Dessa stood, nodded once, and left the office. Outside, the sun had dropped below the mountains, casting the street in purple shadow. She walked back toward the center of town, past the curious stares and sudden silences that followed her like a wake. The diner was the only place still open. She pushed through the door, triggering a small bell, and found a seat at the counter. The place was nearly empty. An elderly couple in a corner booth, a man in work clothes nursing coffee at the far end. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Jolene, approached with a pot of coffee. "Menus on the board," Jolene said, pouring coffee without asking. "Kitchen closes in 20 minutes. Just the coffee's fine," Dessa said. "And maybe some information." Jolene raised an eyebrow. "You're Cole Langtree's sister. The one who's been up in the mountains." "That's right. I'm sorry about Cole. He was a good man." "Quiet but good." Jolene leaned against the counter. "What kind of information are you looking for?" "The land Cole left me. What do you know about it?" Jolene glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Dessa. "Not much to know. It's been empty as long as I can remember. Some folks say it's bad luck. Nothing grows there no matter what you plant. Your great-grandfather supposedly tried to mine it back in the day, but that was before the town was even incorporated. Did Cole ever talk about it?" "Not to me. But he came in here most mornings for breakfast, and the last few months, he seemed different, distracted. He'd sit right where you're sitting and stare out that window at the ridge." Jolene poured herself a cup of coffee. "He had visitors, too. Man in a suit, not from around here. They'd meet at that back booth. Always looked serious. You know who the man was?" "Never got a name, but I saw him leaving the assay office once, so I figured he was some kind of mining consultant or geologist." Dessa absorbed this, her mind working through possibilities. Cole had been investigating something about that land. "One more question," Dessa said. "Vincent Hollis, what's his story?" Jolene's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Vincent's family has been here since the beginning. His great-grandfather was one of the founders. Vincent himself owns half the commercial property in town, sits on every board and committee. He's brought in some development money, which the town needs." She paused. "Some folks think he's a savior. Others think he's buying up Carrion Ridge piece by piece. Which do you think?" Jolene smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think powerful men usually want more power. And I think you should be careful asking questions about things people would rather forget. Dessa finished her coffee and left $2 on the counter. She walked out into the night, breathing in the cool mountain air. The town felt wrong somehow, like a tooth that looked healthy but ached when you bit down. She had nowhere to stay. The old ranch was sold, and she had no intention of spending money on a motel. So she did what came naturally. She walked to the edge of town, following the dirt road that led up to the northern ridge, the land Cole had left her. It took an hour of walking in darkness, guided by starlight and memory, before she reached the property. The hillside rose before her, barren and rocky, exactly as everyone had described. But Dessa had spent 40 years reading landscapes, understanding the language of stone and soil and root. And this land was telling her something. She unpacked her gear in a small clearing near the southern boundary, setting up a simple tarp shelter and starting a small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across the hillside. And for the first time since receiving Mitchell's letter about Cole's death, Dessa felt something close to peace. Her brother had left her this place for a reason, and she had come back to find out why. Dawn arrived with the kind of clarity only the high country knows. Dessa woke to birdsong and the smell of pine carried down from the higher elevations. She'd slept well, better than she had in weeks, wrapped in her old bedroll on ground that somehow felt more honest than any mattress. After a breakfast of jerky and cold coffee, she walked the property line, pacing out the boundaries described in the deed. 40 acres of stubborn earth that refused to cooperate with anything green. The soil was rocky, pale, and when she crouched to examine it, her experienced hands recognized the signature of old mineral extraction, the kind of disturbance that happened when men dug deep and didn't care what they left behind. She returned to her camp and retrieved her pack, pulling out the small folding shovel she'd carried for 40 years. It had dug latrines, fire pits, and burial sites for animals too injured to save. Now it would help her understand what Cole had wanted her to find. Dessa chose a spot near the center of the property, where the ground showed a slight depression, the kind of settling that suggested something beneath had once been hollow. She began to dig, working slowly and methodically, the way her father had taught her. Don't force the earth. Let it tell you where it wants to open. 2 hours later, her shovel struck something solid, not rock, metal. She cleared the soil carefully, using her hands to brush away the loose dirt, and revealed a rusted metal surface. A box, perhaps a foot square, badly corroded but still intact. Her heart quickened as she worked it free from the earth's grip. The box resisted opening at first, the hinges frozen with rust and time. Dessa used her knife to pry it carefully, not wanting to damage whatever lay inside. When it finally gave way, she found herself staring at something wrapped in oilcloth. Preserved against the decades, inside the cloth was a surveyor's compass, old and beautifully made, with brass fittings that had aged to a deep patina. But what made Dessa's breath catch was the inscription on the back, JL 1883, Dessa Langtree, her great-grandfather. She turned the compass over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the history. Josiah had been a mystery in family stories, a man who'd come west with dreams of silver and vanished into those dreams. Her father had spoken of him rarely, and always with a strange mixture of pride and bitterness. Dessa sat back on her heels, the compass resting in her palm. This wasn't just buried, it was hidden, deliberately placed where someone might find it if they knew to look. And Cole had known to look. She returned to her camp and opened her pack again, this time pulling out a bundle of letters she'd brought with her. Cole's correspondence over the years, kept in careful order. She'd read them all before, but now she went through them again, searching for clues she might have missed. Most were mundane, updates about weather, the price of hay, town gossip. But there was one letter, sent 3 months before his death, that she'd never opened. It had arrived a week after she'd received word of Cole's passing, forwarded from a post office box she checked twice a year. She kept it sealed, unable to face his final words. Now, sitting on this barren hillside with her great-grandfather's compass beside her, Dessa broke the seal. The letter was longer than Cole's usual notes. Written in his careful hand, Dessa, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for that. There's a lot I should have told you over the years, a lot I kept buried, because I thought that was what Father would have wanted. But I was wrong. Some things need to come to light, even if it costs us. The land I'm leaving you isn't worthless. It's the most valuable thing our family ever had, and it was stolen from us before we even knew what we possessed. Josiah didn't die prospecting. He was murdered. And Father didn't die in a hunting accident. I've spent 5 years putting the pieces together, and I'm close to understanding the whole picture. There's a compass buried on the property. You'll know it when you see it. That's your starting point. Follow what it leads to. Trust your instincts. You always had better instincts than me. I'm sorry I couldn't finish this myself. I'm sorry for a lot of things. But you're strong enough to do what I couldn't. You're strong enough to make them answer for what they did. Don't trust the official records. Don't trust the town history. And whatever you do, don't trust Vincent Hollis. His family built everything they have on our family's bones. Do what you couldn't do back then. Stay, fight, make them see you. Your brother. Cole. Dessa read the letter 3 times. Her hands steady despite the implications. Murder, theft, a conspiracy spanning generations. Cole had been investigating their family history and had discovered something dangerous enough to kill for. The afternoon sun was high when she heard the sound of an engine laboring up the dirt road. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket, then stood and waited. A silver SUV appeared, expensive and out of place on the rough track. It stopped near her camp, and a man stepped out, tall, well-dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than Dessa spent in a month. He was around her age, maybe a few years younger, with salt and pepper hair styled with product and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Langtree," he said, approaching with his hand extended. "Vincent Hollis. I hope I'm not intruding." Dessa shook his hand briefly. His grip was firm, calculated to convey confidence without aggression. "It's my land." "Technically you are," Hollis laughed, a practiced sound. "Fair enough. I wanted to introduce myself and express my condolences about Cole. He was a good man. We served together on the town council for several years. Appreciate it. I also wanted to make you an offer." Hollis gestured at the barren hillside. "I know Raymond Mitchell mentioned I've been acquiring properties in this area. I'm planning a development, vacation homes, possibly a small resort. This particular parcel would fit well into those plans. I'm prepared to offer you $500, which is more than fair given the condition of the land." Dessa looked at him steadily. "Cole just left it to me. I'm not in a hurry to sell." Of course. I understand." Hollis's smile remained fixed. "But let's be practical. What are you going to do with 40 acres of rocks? You can't farm it, can't build on it without extensive work. It's essentially worthless for any practical purpose. Then why do you want it?" The smile flickered for just a moment. "Contiguous land holdings. It borders several other parcels I've acquired. Makes the development more cohesive." "I'll think about it," Dessa said. Hollis reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Take your time, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often in Carrion Ridge." He handed her the card. "Call me when you're ready to talk seriously." He returned to his SUV and drove away, leaving a small cloud of dust hanging in the still air. Dessa watched until he disappeared around the bend, then looked down at the card in her hand. "Vincent Hollis," the card read. "Mayor, Carrion Ridge, real estate development mayor, just like his father before him." She walked back to the spot where she'd found the compass and began digging again, this time with more purpose. Cole's letter had said to follow what the compass leads to. In surveying, a compass marked claim boundaries, mineral deposits, significant features. If Josiah had buried his compass here, he'd been marking something specific. Dessa dug for another hour, expanding the excavation carefully. Just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, her shovel struck something else, not metal this time, but wood. Rotten, crumbling wood that had once been timbers. Support beams. She'd found the entrance to Josiah's mine. That night, camped beside her discovery, Dessa lay awake watching the stars wheel overhead. Someone had collapsed this mine entrance deliberately, burying it under tons of rock and soil. Someone had wanted to make sure whatever Josiah had found stayed hidden, and now, 140 years later, she was going to dig it back up. The mountains around her stood silent and ancient, keeping their secrets the way they always had. But Dessa had learned patience in those mountains. She had learned to read what others overlooked, to persist when others gave up. She had learned, most importantly, that the truth had a way of rising to the surface. No matter how deep you tried to bury it, tomorrow she would start clearing the mine entrance, and she would find out exactly what her brother had died trying to tell her. The work of excavation was slow and dangerous. Dessa knew better than to rush it. A collapsed mine entrance meant unstable ground, and one wrong move could bring tons of rock down on her head. She worked in the cool hours of morning and evening, avoiding the worst heat of the day, moving each stone carefully and shoring up the spaces she created with salvaged timber. On the third day, she broke through into a small cavity, not the main shaft, but a side pocket that had been deliberately carved and sealed. Inside, wrapped in more oilcloth and placed in a metal box similar to the one that had held the compass, she found a document. The paper was old, yellowed and fragile, but the ink was still legible. It was a mining claim, filed with the Montana Territory Land Office on July 15, 1884. The claim was registered to Dessa Langtree for a silver deposit on this exact parcel of land, described with the same legal boundaries that now appeared on her deed. But what made Dessa's pulse quicken was what she didn't find. There was no record of this claim ever being processed through the county records. According to everything official, Josiah's claim had never existed. She sat in the shade of her tarp, studying the document. The signature at the bottom was witnessed by a territorial clerk named Harrison Mills, and the claim described significant silver deposits based on assay results attached to the filing. This wasn't speculation. Josiah had found something real, something valuable enough to file official paperwork. So why had the claim disappeared from public records? Dessa decided it was time to visit the county records office. She broke camp temporarily, packing her essential gear and hiding the documents in a waterproof bag buried beneath a distinctive rock formation she could find again. Then she walked the 5 miles back into Carrion Ridge. The county building was a 3-story brick structure on the east side of town, built in the 1920s, when Carrion Ridge had ambitions of becoming something more than a ranching outpost. Dessa climbed the steps and entered the cool, dim interior, following signs to the records office on the 2nd floor. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a crown of white hair. His nameplate read Howard Brennan. He looked up as Dessa approached, and recognition flickered across his weathered face. "You're Sam Langtree's daughter," he said. "Dessa, isn't it? I remember you from school. You were a few years behind my son." "That's right." Dessa leaned against the counter. "I'm looking for historical mining claims. Specifically, anything filed in 1884 or 1885. Howard's expression shifted slightly, not quite alarm, but something close. "That's a long time ago." "What exactly are you researching?" "Family history. My great-grandfather Josiah prospected in the area. I'm trying to track what he filed." Howard removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, buying time. "Those records would be in the territorial archives. Problem is, there was a fire here in 1952, lost most of the 19th century documents." "All of them?" "The ones that weren't digitized or copied, yes. It was a tragedy. Decades of history gone." Howard replaced his glasses. "What exactly are you hoping to find?" Dessa pulled out a photocopy she'd made of the claim document, not the original, which she'd hidden carefully. "This a silver claim filed by Dessa Langtree. I'd like to see if there are any supporting documents, processing records, anything that might tell me what happened to it." Howard took the photocopy and studied it for a long moment. His hands, Dessa noticed, trembled slightly. "Where did you get this?" "Family papers." "Is there anything in the system?" Howard turned to his computer and typed slowly, his fingers uncertain on the keyboard. The search took several minutes. Finally, he shook his head. Nothing under that name or those coordinates. I'm sorry. If it existed, it would have been lost in the fire. Convenient fire, Dessa said quietly. Howard looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Just seems interesting that records from a specific period, involving mining claims that might have been valuable, all got destroyed. Miss Langtree, I understand you're looking for answers about your family, but you're making serious implications. That fire was investigated. It was an accident, faulty wiring in the basement storage area. Howard's voice had taken on an edge. You won't find any conspiracy here. Just old papers and an unfortunate accident. Dessa held his gaze. Something in his eyes, fear, maybe, or guilt, told her more than his words. Did you know my father, Howard? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Sam, yes, I knew him. Good man. Terrible accident, that hunting trip. You believe it was an accident? Howard stood abruptly. I'm sorry, Miss Langtree. I have work to do. If you want to file a formal research request, there are forms at the front desk. Dessa nodded slowly and left the office. She'd gotten what she came for, even if it wasn't information. She'd gotten confirmation that someone didn't want those records found. And she'd seen the fear in Howard Brennan's eyes when she mentioned her father. She spent the rest of the day at the town library, a small building attached to the post office. The librarian, a young woman who clearly didn't know Dessa's history, helped her access archived newspapers on microfiche. Dessa worked backward from 1890, scanning headlines and articles about mining activity in the region. There was plenty of coverage. Strikes reported, claims filed, assay results published. The 1880s had been boom years for silver in western Montana. But nowhere in any article did she find mention of Josiah Langtree or his claim. What she did find was interesting in its absence. In July 1884, right when Josiah filed his claim, the newspaper ran several articles about mining activity in the Carrion Ridge area. Then, in September of that year, the coverage stopped abruptly. The next mention of local mining didn't appear until 1887. And by then, it was all about claims filed by 5 men: Richard Hollis, Thomas Brennan, James Tucker, Andrew Vance, and William Marsh, the founding families of Carrion Ridge. Dessa made notes documenting dates and names. A pattern was emerging. Josiah files a claim in July 1884. Coverage stops. 3 years later, 5 men file claims on surrounding properties and found a town. And somewhere in that gap, Josiah Langtree disappears from history entirely. When the library closed at 5, Dessa walked back to her property. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hillside, and she paused at the edge of her land, looking back at Carrion Ridge spread out below. From this vantage point, she could see the whole town, the grid of streets, the brick buildings, the homes spreading out from the center like roots from a tree, all of it built on something that didn't belong to those 5 families. All of it resting on a foundation of theft and murder, if Cole's letter was accurate. Back at her camp, Dessa found something that made her blood run cold. Someone had been there. Her tarp had been moved. Not much, but enough for her to notice. The rocks around her fire pit had been disturbed. And worst of all, someone had been digging near the mine entrance, testing the stability of her excavation. She checked her hidden cache, still secure, thank God, and then examined the new digging. It wasn't extensive, just exploratory, as if someone wanted to see what she'd found without fully committing to a search. As darkness fell, Dessa built her fire and sat watching the flames. She wasn't afraid. 40 years in the mountains had taught her to handle worse than prowlers, but she was angry. Someone thought they could intimidate her, chase her off like they'd probably chased off her father and brother before her. They didn't understand who they were dealing with. That night, Dessa slept with her knife under her bedroll and one ear always listening. The mountain woman had learned long ago how to sleep light and wake fast. Whatever game Carrion Ridge was playing, she was ready to play it right back. 2 days after discovering someone had been prowling her camp, Dessa made a breakthrough. She'd been carefully removing rubble from the collapsed mine entrance, creating a stable tunnel just wide enough to crawl through. The work was exhausting. every muscle in her 68-year-old body protesting. But she'd done harder things in the high country. The tunnel opened into a larger space, not the main shaft, but what looked like a side chamber that had been carved out deliberately. The air was stale but breathable. Dessa lit her battery-powered lantern and swept the beam across the walls. The chamber was roughly 10 feet square, with timber supports that had miraculously held for over a century. Tools lay scattered on the floor, a pickaxe, a shovel, a miner's pan. And in the corner, partially buried in fallen debris, was something that made Dessa's heart clench. A child's tin locket. The kind that would have held a photograph. She picked it up carefully, brushing away dirt. The latch was stiff but functional. Inside were 2 photographs, faded but still visible. 2 children, a girl and a boy, standing in front of a house Dessa recognized. The old Langtree ranch, before it had been expanded and modernized. The girl was her, maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed and wild-haired, standing with her arm around a boy a few years older, Cole. Dessa sat back against the rock wall, the locket clutched in her hand. This had been their father's. She remembered him wearing it on a chain, though she'd never seen what was inside. She'd assumed it held photos of their mother, who died when Dessa was 3. But no, it held photos of his children. Why was it here in this sealed mine chamber? The answer came slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains. Her father had been here. He'd found this place just like she had. He'd been investigating Josiah's claim, trying to understand what had happened to their great-grandfather. And he'd left the locket as a marker, or maybe as a message. Dessa played the lantern beam around the chamber more carefully. There, carved into one of the support timbers, were initials, S.L. Sam Langtree. Her father? Beneath the initials was a date, October 1985. Dessa did the math. October 1985. That was 2 weeks before her father's hunting accident. 2 weeks before he'd gone up into the mountains and never come back. Supposedly killed when his rifle discharged while he was climbing over a deadfall. She'd been 16. Cole had been 19. They'd buried their father on a cold November day, with half the town in attendance and everyone saying what a tragedy it was. What bad luck. How careful you had to be in the backcountry. But it hadn't been bad luck. It had been murder. Dessa felt the old grief rise up, fresh and sharp. All these years, she'd carried the weight of her father's death, the belief that carelessness or fate had taken him. Now she understood. He'd been killed because he'd gotten too close to the truth. Just like Josiah, just like probably Cole. Her family had been systematically eliminated across 3 generations. She spent another hour searching the chamber, looking for anything else her father might have left. In a crevice near where the locket had been, she found a small notebook, the pages swollen with moisture, but still legible. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, notes, observations, questions. Claim filed July 1884, one entry read. No record in county office. Brennan says fire, but fire was 1952. What happened to the 70 years in between? Another entry. 5 families all filed claims, September 1887. Same month town incorporated. Too convenient. What happened to Josiah between 84 and 87? And near the end, found sealed chamber. Collapse was deliberate. Someone didn't want this mine reopened. Need to keep looking, but being watched. Hollis knows something. His grandfather was one of the 5. The final entry was dated October 12th, 1985. Meeting with Brennan tomorrow. Says he has information about the founding. Can't trust him, but need to know what he knows. We'll hide these notes in case... The sentence ended there, unfinished. Dessa closed the notebook carefully and placed it with the locket in her jacket pocket. Her father had been murdered for getting this close. Cole had probably met the same fate. And now here she was, following the same path, but Dessa had something her father and brother hadn't: 40 years of survival, skills and a bone-deep understanding that sometimes you had to become as hard and patient as the mountains themselves. She crawled back out of the mine and emerged into late afternoon sunshine. Her body ached, her hands were scraped raw, but her mind was clear. She knew what she had to do next. That evening, she walked back into town and found Jolene just finishing the dinner shift at the diner. The waitress looked up as Dessa entered, and something in her expression suggested she'd been expecting this visit. "Coffee?" Jolene asked. "And some answers, if you've got them." Jolene poured 2 cups and gestured to the back booth, the one she'd mentioned Cole used to meet his mysterious visitor. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. "You've been digging," Jolene finally said. "It wasn't a question. Found some interesting things. A mining claim that doesn't exist in any official records. My father's notes from right before he died. A locket with pictures of me and Cole." Dessa wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I think you know more than you told me the other night." Jolene sighed, looking older in the harsh fluorescent light. "My grandfather was James Tucker, one of the founding families. He died when I was 12, but before he went, he told me things. Things that kept me up at night." "What kind of things?" "That Carrion Ridge was built on blood money. That the 5 families who founded this town didn't earn their wealth, they stole it. And that they killed to keep the secret." Jolene leaned forward. "My grandfather said a man named Dessa Langtree found silver on that ridge. Real silver enough to make them all rich. But Josiah was stubborn. He wouldn't sell out, wouldn't partner up, wouldn't share. So they took it from him. They murdered him." That's what my grandfather said. On his deathbed, when guilt finally got heavier than greed. He said they sealed Josiah in his own mine and divided up the silver among themselves. Used it to start businesses, buy land, build what became Carrion Ridge. Jolene's voice dropped. "And every generation since has protected that secret. Because if the truth came out, it would destroy everything those families built." Dessa felt the confirmation settle into her bones like cold. "My father found out, probably. And your brother was asking questions too these last few years. Meeting with that geologist, poking around in old records." Jolene paused. "I liked Cole. He was kind. He didn't deserve what happened to him. What did happen to him? A heart attack, officially. But Cole was healthy, took care of himself. And he died 2 weeks after he had a very public argument with Vincent Hollis at a town council meeting. Cole wanted to open the historical records to outside researchers. Hollis blocked it. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that was ugly but coherent. A conspiracy that had lasted 140 years, maintained through violence and intimidation, protecting wealth built on murder. "Why are you telling me this?" Dessa asked. "Because I'm tired," Jolene said simply. "I'm tired of carrying my grandfather's guilt. I'm tired of watching this town pretend to be something it's not. And I'm tired of good people dying for asking questions they have every right to ask." She met Dessa's eyes. "You're going to dig this up, aren't you?" "All of it, yes. Then you need to be careful. The 5 families still run this town. Hollis as mayor, Brennan at the county office, Vance as sheriff, Marsh on the town council, and my cousin Randy Tucker owns the bank. They've got reach and they've got resources. And they've proven they'll kill to protect their secret." Dessa nodded slowly. "I need a favor. Name it. If anything happens to me, I need someone to know where to look. Someone outside the family influence." Dessa pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. "This is where I've hidden copies of everything I've found. The claim document, my father's notes, Cole's letter. If I disappear or have an accident, make sure these get to the state police." Jolene took the paper and tucked it into her apron. "You've got my word." They finished their coffee in silence. 2 women who understood that sometimes the only way to honor the dead was to risk joining them. Dessa walked back to her property under a sky full of stars. The night was cool, the kind of high desert cold that she'd learned to love in the mountains. She thought about her father, standing in that mine chamber, writing those final notes. She thought about Cole, sitting in that diner booth, trying to piece together a puzzle that would get him killed. And she thought about Josiah, sealed in darkness, dying slowly, while 5 men divided up his silver above him. Some debts could only be paid in truth. And Dessa Langtree was going to make sure this debt finally came due, even if it took her last breath to do it. The next morning, Dessa returned to the mine with renewed purpose. She'd spent 40 years learning patience, But now that patience was burning away, replaced by something harder and more urgent. She had names, she had motive, and she had evidence of conspiracy. What she needed now was proof of the original crime. She worked through the morning, clearing more rubble from the main shaft. The going was slow. Every few feet, she encountered deliberate blockages, places where someone had packed rocks and timbers to make the tunnel impassable. This hadn't been a natural collapse. This had been a thorough, systematic sealing. Around noon, she broke through into another chamber, larger than the first. Her lantern revealed tool marks on the walls, the kind left by miners extracting ore. And in a natural alcove, protected from the worst of the moisture, she found what she'd been looking for, a leather-bound ledger, its pages stiff and spotted with mildew, but still intact. Dessa carried it carefully to the entrance, where daylight would let her examine it properly. She sat on a flat rock and opened the ledger with trembling hands. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, recording dates, weights, and values. Silver extraction records, spanning from August 1884 to June 1887. Each entry noted how much ore was removed, its estimated purity and projected value. The numbers were staggering, even accounting for 1880s prices. Josiah had been sitting on a fortune, but what made Dessa's breath catch were the entries from 1887. The handwriting changed, no longer Josiah's careful script, but 5 different hands, rotating entries. And the names appeared at the bottom of the pages. Richard Hollis, Thomas Brennan, James Tucker, Andrew Vance, William Marsh. They'd taken over the mine. They'd continued extracting silver for 3 years after Josiah disappeared. And they'd recorded every ounce of their theft in this ledger, probably never imagining it would survive 140 years, sealed in darkness. Dessa photographed every page with the small digital camera she'd bought in town, working carefully to capture each detail. The dates alone were damning. The first entry under the 5 families' names was dated September 3rd, 1884, just 6 weeks after Josiah's last entry. 6 weeks. That's how long Josiah had survived after filing his claim before they'd murdered him. She tucked the ledger carefully into a waterproof bag and returned it to the mine chamber, hiding it in a different location. Then she took her camera's memory card and made 2 copies at a print shop in town, mailing one to a friend she still maintained contact with in Missoula. The other she gave to Jolene with simple instructions: if anything happened to Dessa, get it to the authorities. That afternoon, Vincent Hollis came calling again. Dessa was at her camp, making notes about the ledger entries, when she heard his SUV laboring up the track. She tucked her notebook away and stood, watching as he parked and approached. His smile was still there, but it had frayed around the edges. "Miss Langtree," he said, "I thought I'd check in, see if you'd given any more thought to my offer." "Still thinking," Dessa said. "I've increased it to $2,000. That's more than generous for undeveloped land." Hollis's eyes drifted to the mine entrance, now clearly visible where Dessa had cleared away rubble. "I see you've been doing some excavation, looking into family history. Find anything interesting?" "Depends on your definition of interesting." Dessa met his gaze steadily. "Found some old mining equipment, some records. Enough to make me curious about what really happened up here in the 1880s. Something shifted in Hollis's expression, the practiced charm falling away to reveal something colder underneath. The 1880s were a long time ago. Ancient history, not really relevant to anyone's life today. I disagree. I think the past has a way of mattering, especially when it was built on lies." Hollis stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Let me be clear, Miss Langtree. This land has no value except what I'm offering you. You're wasting your time digging around in old mines and old stories. Take the money and go back to your mountains." "That's the smart play. And if I don't?" "Then you're making a mistake." Hollis pulled out his phone and showed her a document on the screen. "This is a notice of code violations. Your camp is in violation of county ordinances regarding temporary structures and sanitation. As mayor, I can have the sheriff remove you from this property within 24 hours. Dessa laughed, a sound without humor. "You'd evict a woman from her own land for living in a tent?" "I'd enforce the law, which is what sheriffs do." Hollis pocketed his phone. Or you could accept my very generous offer and avoid all that unpleasantness." "I'll take the unpleasantness." Hollis's jaw tightened. "You're just like your father. Stubborn and stupid. You know how that ended for him?" "I know exactly how it ended." "And I know who was responsible." For a moment, genuine alarm flickered across Hollis's face. Then he composed himself, the mask sliding back into place. "Careful with accusations like that. Defamation is a serious matter. So is murder." Hollis turned and walked back to his SUV without another word. But as he drove away, Dessa saw him on his phone making a call. She'd rattled him. Good. That evening, Sheriff Andrew Vance arrived with 2 deputies. He was a broad man in his 60s, with a face weathered by years of pretending not to see things. He approached Dessa's camp with the papers Hollis had mentioned, looking uncomfortable. "Dessa," he said, nodding. "I've known you since you were a girl. I don't want to do this, then don't. I've got orders." The mayor's filed official complaints. Vance held out the papers. "You've got 24 hours to clear out or face arrest for trespassing and violating county codes." Dessa took the papers and read them carefully. They cited 6 obscure ordinances, all technically applicable, all clearly manufactured for this specific purpose. "This is harassment, Andrew. You know it, I know it, maybe so. But it's legal harassment and I've got to enforce it." Vance's voice dropped. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Your father was a good man. So was Cole." "Then help me," Dessa said. "You know what happened to them. You know what your grandfather did." Vance's face hardened. "I don't know anything except what's in the official records. And those records say your father died in a hunting accident and your brother had a heart attack. That's all I know, and that's all I'm going to know." He tapped the papers in her hand. 24 hours, Dessa. After that, I'll have to arrest you." He left with his deputies, and Dessa sat alone in the gathering darkness. They were closing in, applying pressure, trying to force her off the property before she could dig up anything more damaging, which meant she was close to something they desperately wanted to keep buried. She packed her camp carefully, but instead of leaving, she moved everything deeper into the mine. If they wanted to arrest her, they'd have to follow her underground. And Dessa had spent 40 years in tight places, dark places, dangerous places. She was just getting started. Living in the mine was uncomfortable but defensible. Dessa set up her camp in the larger chamber, the one where she'd found the ledger, and spent her days pushing deeper into the sealed sections of the shaft. The air was stale but breathable, and she'd rigged a simple ventilation system using PVC pipe run to the surface. On the 3rd day underground, she found him. The tunnel opened into a chamber that had been completely sealed, not just blocked, but walled off with mortared stone. Dessa worked for hours to break through, and when she finally did, her lantern beam fell on bones, a skeleton, still wearing the remnants of clothes that had rotted to threads, boots that had survived the decades, and lying beside the bones, a pocket watch, its crystal cracked and stained with what could only be dried blood. Dessa knelt beside her great-grandfather's remains, feeling grief and rage war inside her chest. Dessa Langtree hadn't died prospecting. He died here, in this sealed chamber, trapped deliberately by men who wanted his silver more than they valued his life. She picked up the pocket watch carefully. It had stopped at 11:47, morning or night, she couldn't tell. But that was the moment Josiah's life had ended, sealed in darkness by men whose descendants now ran Carrion Ridge. The watch was engraved on the back, "To Josiah." With love, Margaret. Dessa didn't know who Margaret was. Josiah's wife, probably, her own great-grandmother. A woman who'd waited for a husband who never came home, who'd raised children alone, who'd died never knowing her husband had been murdered for silver that could have given them all a better life. The enormity of the crime settled over Dessa like a physical weight. This wasn't just murder, it was erasure. They'd killed Josiah, stolen his claim, and written him out of history so thoroughly that even his own descendants barely knew he'd existed. She carefully documented the chamber with photographs, making sure to capture the sealed entrance, the skeleton's position, and the pocket watch. Then she did something that surprised her. She sat beside Josiah's bones and talked to him. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said quietly. "I'm sorry nobody came looking until it was too late. But I'm here now, and I promise you, they're going to answer for what they did." That night, she was woken by sounds outside the mine entrance. Voices low and urgent, and the scrape of boots on rock. Dessa moved silently through the darkness. Her eyes adjusted, her body remembering every turn of the tunnel. She reached a position near the entrance where she could hear without being seen. "She's got to be in there." That was Vincent Hollis's voice, tight with anger. "The camp's inside, everything's moved underground. We can't just seal it again. That's murder." A second voice. She thought it might be Brennan from the county office. "It's self-defense," Hollis snapped. "She's threatening everything our family's built. You want your kids to know their great-great-grandfather was a murderer? You want to lose your house, your business, everything? There has to be another way. There isn't, not anymore. She's found too much. My grandfather told me what happened, made me swear to protect the family. This is protecting the family." A third voice, older and rougher, Sheriff Vance. "I won't be part of killing a woman. I don't care what she's found." "Then leave," Hollis said. "Brennan and I can handle it." There was a long silence, then footsteps walking away, Vance leaving. Dessa felt a small flicker of relief. At least one of them had a conscience. "Let's get this done," Hollis said. "Bring the explosives." Dessa moved fast, retreating deeper into the mine. She knew these tunnels now, had mapped them in her mind. There was another exit, a ventilation shaft that opened near the top of the ridge. It was narrow and dangerous, but it was a way out. She grabbed her pack and the waterproof bag containing Josiah's pocket watch, then moved through the darkness toward the back of the mine. Behind her she heard the sound of rocks being piled at the entrance, and then Hollis's voice, muffled but audible. "When this goes, the whole entrance collapses. Nobody will find her until spring, if then." Dessa climbed. The ventilation shaft was more of a natural chimney in the rock, barely wide enough for her body. Her shoulders scraped against stone. Her hands found holds by feel rather than sight. 68 years old, climbing for her life, driven by rage and determination in equal measure. She emerged on the ridge just as the explosion rumbled through the mountain. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder, and a plume of dust rose from where her mine entrance had been. Dessa stood in the darkness, breathing hard, watching smoke and dust settle over the hillside where she'd been living. They'd tried to kill her, just like they'd killed Josiah and her father and Cole. The pattern held, but she was alive and she had evidence, and she had witnesses who'd seen her go into that mine. Hollis had just made a fatal mistake. He'd committed attempted murder in front of Howard Brennan, a man whose conscience Jolene said was already eating him alive. Dessa made her way down the back side of the ridge, moving carefully in the darkness, using stars to navigate. She needed to get to town, to safety, before Hollis realized she'd escaped. She needed to get to Jolene, to make sure the evidence she'd distributed was secure. But first, she needed to make a phone call. She reached the highway by dawn and flagged down a truck driver who gave her a ride to a gas station. Using the pay phone, she didn't trust her cell not to be traced. She called the Montana State Police and asked for the Criminal Investigations Division. "I need to report a murder," she told the dispatcher. "Actually, multiple murders spanning 140 years. And I need to report an attempted murder that happened about 2 hours ago." The dispatcher's voice sharpened. "Ma'am, what's your location?" "Carrion Ridge, Montana. My name is Dessa Langtree, and I have evidence that the founding families of this town built their wealth on a murder they've been covering up since 1884. They tried to kill me tonight to keep me quiet." Dessa's voice was steady. "Calm. I have documents, photographs, and witness testimony. And I have the body of the original victim, my great-grandfather, still sealed in the mine where they left him to die. Stay where you are, ma'am. We're sending officers." Dessa hung up and walked into the gas station. She bought coffee and sat at a small table by the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Her mountains, her land, her family's legacy, finally coming to light after 140 years in darkness. She thought about Josiah, dying alone in that sealed chamber. About her father, shot in the back and left to look like an accident. About Cole, poisoned slowly, dying in a hospital bed while the town sent flowers and expressed sympathy. 3 generations of Langtrees, killed for knowing too much. But Dessa was still alive, and she was done running, done hiding, done letting other people write her family's story. She was about to rewrite the history of Carrion Ridge, and everyone who'd profited from that old murder was about to pay the price. The state police arrived within 3 hours, 2 detectives and a forensics team. They set up in a motel conference room and listened to Dessa's story, recording every word. She laid out the timeline, showed them the photographs, presented the documents. When she finished, the lead detective, a woman named Patricia Reeves, sat back with a look of grim determination. "This is going to blow up the whole town," Reeves said. "Good," Dessa replied. They drove to the property together, Dessa directing them to the collapsed mine entrance. The explosion had been thorough. Tons of rock blocked what had been her tunnel. But the forensics team confirmed what Dessa told them. This was a deliberate demolition, not a natural collapse. "It'll take days to excavate safely," the forensics supervisor said. "But we'll get in there. If there's a body like you described, we'll find it." While they worked, Dessa remembered something Cole had said in his letter, something about a safe deposit box. She'd been so focused on the mine that she'd forgotten about it. Now, with state police protection, she decided it was time to see what else Cole had left her. Howard Brennan was at the county office when Dessa arrived, flanked by Detective Reeves. His face went pale when he saw them. "Mr. Brennan," Reeves said, showing her badge. "We need access to any safe deposit boxes registered to Cole Langtree. There's procedures. There's also probable cause and a woman who was nearly murdered last night. We can get a warrant or you can cooperate. Your choice." Brennan's hands shook as he pulled up the records. "Box 247, he said quietly. "I'll need to get the master key." They followed him to the vault, a small room lined with metal boxes. Brennan opened box 247 and stepped back, his eyes not meeting Dessa's. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with documents. Dessa carried it back to the motel and spread the contents across the conference table. What she found made the silver mine look like small change. Cole had been thorough. He'd hired a geological surveyor, paid for a full mineral analysis of the property, and commissioned a comprehensive report on its resources. The surveyor's findings, dated 8 months before Cole's death, were stunning. The land contained significant deposits of rare earth elements, lithium, lanthanum, cerium, and several others, worth potentially millions of dollars with modern extraction techniques. The silver Josiah had found was there too, but it was nothing compared to these modern strategic minerals, essential for batteries, electronics, and green energy technology. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was the correspondence. Cole had been in contact with the surveyor, discussing how to move forward. And in those letters, the surveyor mentioned that someone else had already approached him about the same. A property, someone who'd seen his preliminary results and wanted to suppress them. Vincent Hollis. Dessa read the letters with growing understanding. Hollis had learned about the rare earth deposits. He'd known that Dessa's land, worthless-looking, impossible to farm, was actually sitting on a fortune. That's why he'd been so eager to buy it. That's why he'd tried to seal the mine with her inside. This wasn't about protecting a 140-year-old secret anymore. This was about controlling millions of dollars in mineral wealth. "He killed Cole," Dessa said quietly. "Not to protect the past, but to steal the future." Detective Reeves looked up from the document she was reading. "You have proof?" "Not direct proof. But look at the timeline." Dessa spread out the letters. The surveyor sends his findings to Cole in March. In April, someone contacts the surveyor asking him to suppress the results. He doesn't name who, but says it was local authorities with development interests. In May, Cole has a public argument with Hollis at a town council meeting about opening historical records. 2 weeks later, Cole dies of a heart attack at age 64, with no history of heart disease. "Suspicious, but circumstantial," Reeves said. "Without physical evidence? Then we dig up Cole's body and test for poison," Dessa said flatly. My father's too. Both were buried in the town cemetery. Both died under suspicious circumstances. Both were investigating the same property. Reeves nodded slowly. I'll petition for exhumation orders. It'll take a few days. She paused. You understand what you're asking, right? You're asking to dig up your brother and your father. I'm asking for justice, Dessa said. Whatever it takes. That afternoon, Howard Brennan came to the motel. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his face grey and hollowed out. He asked to speak to Dessa alone, and Reeves grudgingly agreed, waiting just outside the door. I need to tell you something, Brennan said, sitting heavily in a chair. Something I should have told you the first day you walked into my office. I'm listening. My grandfather, Thomas Brennan, he was one of the 5 who killed Dessa Langtree. I've known that my whole life. He told me on his deathbed, made me promise to keep the secret, to protect the family name. Brennan's voice cracked. I've been carrying that burden for 43 years. And my father? Dessa asked. Did you know about that too? Brennan nodded miserably. I didn't know at the time. I was young, stupid, thought the old murder didn't matter anymore. But then your father started asking questions, digging into the records. He came to me, asked me to help him find the truth. Brennan looked up, tears in his eyes. I told my father, Thomas's son, what Sam was doing. I thought he'd just warn Sam off, scare him a little. I didn't know they'd kill him. But they did, yes, and I've lived with that knowledge every day since. I couldn't stop it. I was too scared, too worried about my own family's reputation. Brennan pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is my grandfather's confession. He wrote it before he died, detailing everything, the murder, the cover-up, how they divided the silver. He made me swear never to reveal it. But I'm done protecting murderers. Dessa took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a handwritten statement dated 1982, signed by Thomas Brennan. It described in painful detail how the 5 founding families had lured Josiah into the mine, sealed him inside, and taken his claim. It named names, gave dates, described how they'd falsified records and bribed the Territorial Land Office to erase Josiah's claim. It was the confession they needed. Why now? Dessa asked. Why not years ago? Because last night I watched Vincent Hollis try to murder you the same way our grandfathers murdered Josiah. And I realized, if I stayed silent, I was just as guilty as they were. Brennan stood, looking steadier now, as if confession had given him strength. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I know. It won't bring back your father, but maybe it'll stop this from happening to anyone else. After Brennan left, Dessa sat alone with the documents spread around her. Cole's mineral survey, the surveyor's letters, Brennan's grandfather's confession, the photographs of Josiah's skeleton still sealed in that chamber. She'd come back to Carrion Ridge to bury her brother. Instead, she'd uncovered a conspiracy that reached back 140 years and stretched into a future worth millions. She'd discovered that her family had been systematically eliminated across 3 generations, first for silver, then for silence, and finally for rare earth minerals that nobody even knew existed when Josiah died. The town she'd fled 40 years ago had been built on murder and maintained through murder. And the land everyone had mocked her for inheriting, that worthless, barren hillside, was the key to unraveling it all. Dessa thought about Cole's note. Hidden in that $1 bill, do what you couldn't do then. 40 years ago she'd run. She'd been pregnant, scared, ashamed, and she'd let the town drive her into the mountains where she could hide from judgment and whispers. But she wasn't that frightened young woman anymore. She was 68 years old, weathered by hard living and harder choices. And she'd spent 4 decades learning that survival sometimes meant standing your ground, even when the odds said. Ron Cole had known she'd come back. Different, stronger. He'd known she was the only one who could finish what their family had started 140 years ago, and Dessa Langtree was about to prove him right. The exhumation orders came through faster than Dessa expected. Apparently attempted murder expedited bureaucratic processes. Cole's body was disinterred on a grey Tuesday morning. with Dessa standing at a respectful distance while forensic pathologists did their work. They took samples and promised results within a week. That same day, the state police finished excavating the mine entrance Hollis had blown shut. The forensics team emerged with confirmation. They'd found Dessa Langtree's remains, sealed in a chamber exactly as Dessa had described. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was starvation and dehydration, consistent with being trapped alive. The mortared stone wall that had sealed him in was man-made, deliberate, and approximately 140 years old. Murder. Confirmed and documented. Vincent Hollis was arrested at his office, charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. They'd found explosives residue on his clothes and in his vehicle. When they searched his home office, they found something else. Cole's medical records, stolen from the local clinic, with handwritten notes about slow-acting poisons that mimicked heart attacks. The town erupted. News vans arrived from Missoula and Helena. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. The story had everything: historical murder, modern conspiracy, millions in hidden mineral wealth, and a mountain woman who'd survived being buried alive to expose it all. Dessa gave one interview to a reporter from the Montana Standard and then refused all others. She said what needed saying. My great-grandfather was murdered for silver in 1884. My father was murdered for asking questions in 1985. My brother was murdered for rare earth minerals in 2023. This town was built on blood, and it's time to answer for that. The 5 families fractured under pressure. The Tuckers and Marshes, the descendants who hadn't known about the murders, cooperated fully, turning over family papers and documents. The Vances remained silent behind lawyers, but Howard Brennan testified, and his grandfather's confession provided the historical foundation that linked past crimes to present ones. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jodleen Tucker, cleaning out her grandfather's attic after his death years ago, had kept a wooden box she'd found hidden in the rafters. Inside was a cassette tape recorded in 1983 of her grandfather James Tucker talking to his son. The cassette had been damaged by moisture, but state forensic audio specialists restored it. Dessa listened to the tape in Detective Reeves's office, hearing a dead man's voice describe murder as casually as he might describe planting crops. "We didn't have a choice," James Tucker's gravelly voice said through the static. Josiah wouldn't deal, wouldn't partner, wouldn't sell his claim for any price. Said it was his legacy for his children. Well, we had children too, and that silver was going to make us all rich. Richard, that's Hollis's grandfather, he was the one who suggested sealing the mine. Said if we just killed him, there'd be questions. But if he disappeared down his own mine shaft, people would think it was an accident. So we lured him in, told him we wanted to help him shore up a weak section, and then we bricked him in. Took us 2 days to seal it proper. There was a pause, the sound of liquid being poured, whiskey probably. Then Tucker continued. We heard him for 3 days. Screaming at first, then begging, then just crying. On the 4th day, it went quiet. We waited another week to be sure. Then we opened up our own entrance on the far side of the vein and started extracting. Split it 5 ways, equal shares. Built everything you see in this town with that silver. The voice on the tape shifted, became more defensive. You're looking at me like I'm a monster. But we built Carrion Ridge. We brought civilization to this valley. Jobs, schools, churches, all of it came from what we did. Josiah's children got to grow up in a real town instead of some mining camp. We gave them that, even if they didn't know it. Dessa closed her eyes, hearing her great-grandfather's screams echoing across 140 years. 3 days of dying slowly in darkness, knowing he'd been murdered. Probably understanding exactly why, but it was what came next on the tape that changed everything. Sam Langtree started asking questions a few years back, Tucker said, his voice harder now. Josiah's grandson, smart man, too smart, started poking around in the records, figured out something wasn't right about his grandfather's disappearance. Richard's boy, young Vincent, he was on the town council by then, and he convinced us we had to do something. Said if Sam found the truth, it would destroy all our families. So we arranged that hunting accident. Andrew Vance, the sheriff, he made sure the investigation went the way it needed to go. Another pause. I'm not proud of it, but Sam was going to ruin us all. Sometimes you have to protect what you've built, even if the cost is high. The tape continued, but Dessa had heard enough. Here was James Tucker confessing to conspiracy in both murders, Josiah's in 1884 and her father's in 1985. He named Vincent Hollis's father as the instigator of Sam's murder. He implicated the previous Sheriff Vance in covering it up, and there was more. Jolene had found something else in that attic box, a journal kept by James Tucker in the 1980s. In it, he documented meetings with the other families, discussions about the Langtree problem, and specific plans for making Sam's death look accidental. The journal also mentioned Cole by name. Sam's boy is asking questions now. Vincent Jr. says we might have to deal with him too if he doesn't drop it. They'd been watching Cole for years, waiting, and when he'd gotten close enough to the truth, when he'd commissioned that mineral survey and discovered the rare earth deposits Vincent Hollis had acted, the toxicology. Results came back 3 days later. Cole's tissue samples showed traces of thallium, a heavy metal poison that accumulates slowly and mimics heart attack symptoms. The same poison had been found in tissue samples from Sam Langtree's exhumed body, preserved in the cold Montana soil. 2 more murders. Now proven, Detective Reeves arrested Vincent Hollis Sr., the former mayor, now in his 90s and living in a nursing home. She arrested the former Sheriff Andrew Vance, who'd retired to Arizona. She brought charges against several other descendants who'd had knowledge of the crimes and failed to report them. The town council called an emergency meeting to discuss the crisis. They'd lost their mayor, their moral authority, and their founding mythology all in the space of 2 weeks. Property values were plummeting as the scandal spread. Businesses were closing. People were leaving. Dessa attended the meeting. She sat in the back row of the packed council chambers and listened to people argue about what to do. Some wanted to downplay the story, claim it was all ancient history that didn't reflect on modern Carrion Ridge. Others wanted to embrace the truth, build a memorial, acknowledge the crimes. Then Jolene Tucker stood up to speak. "My name is Jolene Tucker," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "My grandfather was one of the 5 men who murdered Josiah Langtree. I've known that for 30 years, and I kept silent because I was ashamed, because I was scared, because I thought protecting my family name mattered more than justice." She looked around the room. "But I was wrong. And every day we pretend this didn't happen, we're wrong too." She pointed to a painting on the wall, the 5 founders, depicted as pioneers bringing civilization to the wilderness. "That painting is a lie. Those men were murderers and thieves. And we need to stop honoring them." The room erupted in argument, but Jolene pressed on. "Dessa Langtree lost her great-grandfather, her father, and her brother to the secret those 5 men created. She was nearly killed herself trying to uncover the truth. And instead of thanking her, instead of apologizing, we're sitting here arguing about our reputation." She shook her head. "Our reputation should be that we finally told the truth, that we finally made it right." The meeting went late into the night. By the end, the council had voted to remove all monuments honoring the founding families, to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and to formally apologize to the Langtree family. They also voted to support legislation that would give Dessa clear title to all mineral rights on her property, including the rare earth deposits. It was a start. Not justice exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition that lies, no matter how old, still cause damage. Dessa left the meeting and walked through the quiet streets of Carrion Ridge. It was nearly midnight, and the town was dark except for streetlights and the occasional window. She thought about all the people sleeping in these houses, built with money that came from her great-grandfather's silver, living on wealth that had been stolen before any of them were born. Were they guilty? The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of murderers? Dessa didn't know, but she knew they were responsible for what they did with the truth once it was revealed. And tomorrow she would stand in a courtroom and make sure that truth was heard by everyone who mattered. She walked back to the motel where she'd been staying since the explosion. The state police had offered to put her up somewhere safer, but Dess had refused. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't running. She was standing in the middle of Carrion Ridge, visible and unafraid, daring anyone to try what Vincent Hollis had tried. Tomorrow, the trial would begin. Vincent Hollis would face charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and poisoning. His father would face charges as an accessory to murder. The truth about Carrion Ridge's founding would enter the public record. Permanent and undeniable. And Dessa would finally be able to lay her family's ghosts to rest. The courthouse was packed when Dessa arrived. News cameras lined the steps, reporters called questions, and townspeople pressed close to get inside. She walked through the crowd with Detective Reeves beside her, her head high and her hands steady despite the chaos. The courtroom itself was old, built in the same era as most of Carrion Ridge, high ceilings, dark wood, brass fixtures that had aged to a dull patina. Vincent Hollis sat at the defense table, flanked by expensive lawyers from Billings. He looked smaller than Dessa remembered, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of evidence piled against him. The prosecution called Dessa as their first witness. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then she began her testimony. She described finding the compass, the mining claim, her father's notes. She described the ledger showing 3 years of silver extraction by the 5 founding families. She described finding Josiah's body, sealed in that chamber with a pocket watch stopped at 11:47. When she reached the part about the explosion, about Hollis and Brennan discussing sealing her in the mine, the courtroom went utterly silent. I heard Vincent Hollis say, "When this goes, the whole entrance collapses. Nobody will find her until spring, if then," Dessa testified, her voice steady. "Then I heard the explosion. I escaped through a ventilation shaft, but if I hadn't known those tunnels, I would have died exactly like my great-grandfather did, sealed in darkness, left to starve." The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, approached the witness stand with a silver sample in an evidence bag. "Miss Langtree, do you recognize this?" "Yes, that's the original silver strike sample from Josiah's claim. It was filed with the Territorial Land Office in 1884, marked with his initials." "And where did you find it?" "In the sealed chamber with his body. He'd kept it as proof of his claim. It's still marked with his initials." J.L. Walsh displayed the sample for the jury, then turned back to Dessa. "Why do you think your brother left you this land?" Dessa looked at Vincent Hollis as she answered. "Because he knew I wouldn't give up. He knew I'd dig until I found the truth, no matter what it cost me. And he knew that someone had to make them answer for what they'd done, to Josiah, to my father, and to him." The defense attorney, a slick man named Morrison, tried to shake her testimony on cross-examination. He suggested she was motivated by greed, that the rare earth minerals had given her incentive to fabricate a story. He implied she'd planted evidence, that her time in the mountains had made her unstable. Dessa listened patiently, then answered each accusation with calm precision. She wasn't unstable. She had witnesses who could verify every document's authenticity. And as for greed, she'd lived 40 years on almost nothing, wanting nothing except to be left alone. She didn't need millions. She needed justice. Morrison's questions grew sharper, more personal. He brought up her pregnancy at 28, her unmarried status, her decision to flee into the mountains. "Isn't it true, Miss Langtree, that you abandoned your family? That you left your brother alone to deal with your father's death?" "Yes," Dessa said quietly. "I did. And I've regretted it every day since." "So you have a history of running away when things get difficult." "I did. 40 years ago I ran because I was ashamed and scared. But I'm not running anymore. I came back because my brother asked me to finish what our family started. And that's exactly what I'm doing." Morrison tried a few more angles, but Dessa didn't break. She'd spent 4 decades surviving in conditions that would have killed most people. A lawyer's questions were nothing compared to winter at 9,000 feet with no shelter but what you could build. The prosecution rested after 3 days of testimony. They'd presented the documents, the confession tape, the toxicology reports, the physical evidence from the mine. They'd proven both the historical murders and the modern ones, linking them together in an unbroken chain of conspiracy and violence. Then the defense called their witnesses. They tried to paint Vincent Hollis as a community leader, a man who'd devoted his life to Carrion Ridge's prosperity. They suggested the explosion was meant only to collapse the mine entrance for safety reasons, that Hollis had no idea Dessa was inside. They argued that even if the historical murders happened, which they didn't, concede Vincent couldn't be held responsible for crimes committed by his great-grandfather 140 years ago, but they couldn't explain the thallium in Cole's body. They couldn't explain why Hollis had stolen Cole's medical records and researched slow-acting poisons. They couldn't explain the threatening phone calls he'd made to Howard Brennan after the investigation began, and they couldn't explain one final piece of evidence that the prosecution introduced on the last day, a recorded conversation between Vincent Hollis and his father, made by Vincent's own son, Marcus, who'd grown sickened by his family's legacy. In the recording, Vincent Sr. told his son, "Your great-grandfather built this town on hard choices. My father made hard choices too, when Sam Langtree threatened everything. Now you're making the same choice Cole's sister. Do what needs doing, son. Family comes first," Vincent Jr.'s response. "I tried the legal way. She won't sell. If she exposes the rare earth deposits before I secure the land, we lose millions. I have to seal that mine, then do it. And make sure there's no evidence this time." The courtroom erupted when the recording ended. Judge Margaret Kinsey had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Marcus Hollis, who'd provided the recording, sat in the gallery with tears streaming down his face. He turned in his own father and grandfather to stop the cycle of violence. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon, with storm clouds gathering over the Bitterroot Mountains. Dessa sat in the front row, flanked by Jolene and Howard Brennan, who'd become unlikely allies in the fight for truth. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Kinsey asked. The jury foreman, a retired schoolteacher named Alice Warren, stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." The courtroom stirred, whispers spreading like wind through grass. Vincent Hollis's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched on the table. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder." "Guilty." "On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Cole Langtree." "Guilty." One by one, the foreman read the verdicts. Guilty on all counts. Vincent Hollis, Jr., mayor of Carrion Ridge and descendant of its founders, would spend the rest of his life in prison. His father, Vincent Sr., would face a separate trial for his role in Sam Langtree's murder. Sheriff Andrew Vance was already negotiating a plea deal. The conspiracy that had lasted 140 years was finally definitively broken. After the verdict, Dessa stood outside the courthouse and faced the cameras one last time. She'd prepared no statement, but the words came naturally. "My great-grandfather Josiah Langtree came to Montana in 1883 looking for a better life. He found silver, filed a legal claim, and did everything right. He was murdered for it by 5 men who decided his life was worth less than their wealth. For 140 years, those men and their descendants built fortunes on that stolen silver, and they killed anyone who got close to the truth. My father, my brother, they tried to kill me too." She paused, looking at the crowd. Townspeople, reporters, descendants of the founding families standing with shame on their faces. "But I'm still here. And the truth is finally in the light where it belongs. Carrion Ridge was built on murder, and for 140 years it's been maintained through silence and fear. That ends today." A reporter called out, "What will you do with the land now? With the mineral rights?" "I'm going to make sure my family's legacy isn't forgotten. The rare earth deposits will be developed, but responsibly. with environmental protections and fair labor practices. And a significant portion of the profits will go to a foundation in my family's name, supporting education, truth in history, and helping victims of injustice get their stories heard. Do you forgive the town, the families? Dessa considered the question. I don't know yet. Forgiveness is complicated when you're standing on ground soaked with your family's blood. But I know this. Some of the descendants had no idea what their ancestors did. They're not guilty of murder. They're only guilty if they choose to keep lying once they know the truth. She looked directly at the camera. To anyone watching who's carrying a family secret, who knows about an old crime or an old injustice, tell the truth. It might hurt. It might cost you something. But silence has a price too, and it's almost always paid by people who don't deserve it. Later that evening, Dessa returned to her property. The mine entrance had been secured by state engineers, made safe for historical preservation. Josiah's remains had been properly buried in the town cemetery, with a new headstone that told the truth. Dessa Langtree, 1847-1884. Murdered for his claim. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Dessa stood at the mine entrance as the sun set, holding the pocket watch that had stopped at 11:47. She'd had it cleaned and repaired. Though she kept the crystal cracked and stained, evidence should remain evidence. She thought about Josiah dying in that darkness, about her father falling in the mountains with a bullet in his back, about Cole lying in a hospital bed while poison stopped his heart. 3 generations of Langtrees, killed for the same piece of land she now stood on, but they hadn't died for nothing. Their murders had finally been exposed, acknowledged, punished. The truth they died protecting was now part of the permanent record. Nobody could erase it again. Dessa heard footsteps and turned to find Marcus Hollis approaching. Vincent's son looked hollow, devastated by his choice to turn in his own family. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry for all of it, for what they did to your family across all those years. Dessa studied him. He was younger than Cole would have been, maybe mid-50s, with the same features as his father, but different eyes, eyes that held conscience instead of calculation. You did the right thing, she said finally. Turning in your father. That took courage. It took too long. I should have known something was wrong when Cole died. I should have questioned more. Marcus looked at the mine entrance. My whole life, I was taught that our family built this town, that we were pillars of the community. Finding out we were murderers and thieves, you're not, Dessa interrupted. Your ancestors were. You're the one who stopped it. Marcus nodded, not quite accepting the absolution, but hearing it. What you said earlier about forgiveness being complicated, I understand that. I can't forgive my father either, even though he's my father. Maybe especially because he's my father. They stood together in the fading light, 2 people bound by tragedy and truth. Neither quite sure how to move forward, but both determined to try. The foundation you mentioned, Marcus said. I'd like to contribute. Not to buy forgiveness or clean my family name. Just to help, if you'll let me. Dessa thought about it. Every instinct told her to refuse, to keep the Hollis family as far from Langtree business as possible. But Marcus wasn't his father, and punishing children for their parents' sins was exactly the kind of thinking that had perpetuated this cycle for 140 years. I'll think about it, she said, which was more than she'd thought she could offer. Marcus left as darkness fell. Dessa remained, watching stars appear over the mountains. Tomorrow, she would begin the real work, setting up the foundation, planning the mineral development, building something lasting from all this pain. But tonight, she just wanted to stand on this ground and feel what 140 years of justice finally delivered felt like. It felt like closure, like the end of a long, dark chapter and the beginning of something new, like her family could finally rest. 6 months after the verdict, Dessa stood at the dedication ceremony for the Langtree Memorial. The site occupied a corner of her property, overlooking Carrion Ridge, with a view that stretched across the valley to the mountains beyond. 3 headstones stood in a row, Josiah, Sam, and Cole together at last. The memorial plaque told their story simply: the Langtree family paid the ultimate price for truth across 3 generations. May their sacrifice remind us that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that some debts can only be paid in honesty. The ceremony was small. Jolene and Howard stood beside Dessa, along with Marcus Hollis and a handful of townspeople who'd chosen truth over comfort. Detective Reeves had driven up from Helena, the mayor newly elected after Vincent's conviction, gave a short speech about Carrion Ridge's commitment to facing its history honestly, but what meant most to Dessa was the young girl standing at the edge of the gathering. She was maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and serious eyes, holding her grandmother's hand. After the ceremony, the grandmother approached Dessa hesitantly. "I'm Linda Garrett," she said. "My maiden name was Langtree. I'm Josiah's great-great-granddaughter through his daughter Elizabeth. I didn't even know we were related until all this came out in the news. I wanted to thank you for finding the truth, for giving our family back its history." Dessa looked at the girl, seeing in her face an echo of the photograph in that tin locket. Family. She'd spent 40 years alone, thinking she was the last Langtree who cared about justice. But here was proof that her family had continued, branched out, survived despite everything. "What's your name?" Dessa asked the girl. "Margaret," the girl said quietly. "Like my great-great-great-grandmother." Margaret. The name engraved on Josiah's pocket watch. The woman who'd waited for a husband who never came home. Dessa felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief this time, but something softer. Hope, maybe. Connection. The knowledge that her fight hadn't just been for the dead, but for the living too. For this girl and all the Langtree descendants who deserved to know their history. "Would you like to help me with something?" Dessa asked Margaret. "I'm building a foundation to preserve family histories and help people uncover truths that were buried. I could use someone young to make sure we're thinking about the future, not just the past." Margaret's eyes lit up, and she looked to her grandmother, who nodded permission. "I'd like that," Margaret said. After the ceremony, Dessa walked back to the cabin she'd built on her land. It wasn't much. Single room, wood stove, simple furnishings, but it was hers. More importantly, it was home in a way nothing had been since she'd fled Carrion Ridge 40 years ago. The rare earth mineral development was moving forward under strict environmental oversight. The extraction would take years, but the preliminary estimates suggested revenues in the tens of millions. Dessa had set up the foundation with 70% of the profits, keeping enough to live comfortably, but not lavishly. Money had never been what this was about. She sat on her porch as evening fell, watching lights come on in Carrion Ridge below. The town was changing. Some families had left, unable to bear the shame. Others were working to make amends, funding scholarships, supporting historical preservation, acknowledging the crimes their ancestors committed. It would take generations to fully heal, if it ever did. But at least now the healing could begin. Jolene drove up the rough track just as the sun touched the mountains. She'd brought dinner, fried chicken from the diner, coleslaw, fresh bread. They ate on the porch, talking quietly about small things. The weather, town gossip, Jolene's grandson's baseball team. "You ever think about going back to the mountains?" Jolene asked. "To your old life?" Dessa considered it. She missed the solitude sometimes, the simplicity of survival without complications. But she thought about Margaret's eager face, about the Foundation's work, about the Langtree name finally meaning something other than tragedy. "No," she said. "I think I'm where I'm supposed to be." After Jolene left, Dessa pulled out the $1 bill Cole had left her. She'd framed it along with his note. The bill was creased and worn, but the handwriting on the back was still clear. "It's yours now. Do what you couldn't do then." She'd done it. She'd stayed. She'd fought. She'd made them see her, see the truth, see what their town was really built on. And in doing that, she'd found something she hadn't expected to find. A reason to stay. A purpose beyond survival. A family, scattered and damaged but real, that needed her to keep telling the truth. Dessa went inside and added wood to the stove. On her desk sat a laptop, a recent purchase that still felt foreign in her hands, and she opened the document she'd been working on. A book about Josiah, about her father, about Cole, about 40 years in the mountains and the lessons of solitude, about coming home and facing everything she'd run from, about how some women don't come back to forgive, they come back to finish what was started. She typed for an hour, the words flowing more easily than she'd expected. When she finally stopped, she looked out the window at the darkness beyond. The mine entrance was barely visible in the starlight, secured now, preserved as a historical site where visitors could learn what really happened in 1884. No more secrets, no more lies, just truth finally speaking after 140 years of forced silence. Dessa closed her laptop and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, she'd meet with the foundation board. Next week, she'd speak at a conference about historical injustice. Next month, she'd help Margaret research their family tree, tracing the Langtree line forward from Josiah and Margaret through 5 generations to the present. But tonight, she just wanted to sleep in her own bed, on her own land, in the home she'd built with her own hands on ground that finally, legally, belonged to her family. She lay down and closed her eyes, and for the first time in 40 years, Dessa Langtree slept without dreams of running. She dreamed instead of building, of growing things in soil that everyone said was barren, of legacy and truth, and the long, patient work of making things right. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, but on one small hillside, on 40 acres of land that 3 generations had died for, a light burned in a window. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the bitter roots, it would shine on ground that finally told the truth. Some women don't come back to forgive. They come back to make things right, and sometimes against all odds they succeed.